I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comment. Nobody has approached either of us relative to public comment. We will move on to the minutes from the February 12th and 20th meetings, which are in the packet. What are your wishes? And by the way, we have all members except for Chair Gibbs are present. We have 4 people in person and 2 remote. Supervisor Poole and Reynolds remote. So what are your wishes relative to the minutes? Supervisor Lemmer.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion on the minutes? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to 6A1, approval of claims and question cost. That was sent out to the members. Are there any questions or what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer.
Move to approve.
Supervisor Lemmer moves to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor or Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the claims and question costs will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Now claim disallowance for Ariel Gorst. Mike, is that?
Jamie's going to take this one.
WMIC is requesting disallowance of the claim filed by Ariel Gorst. Through investigation determined there's no liability for this claim due to immunities following snowplows. Also, no identifying information regarding alleged vehicle, police report, witnesses, or traffic surveillance.
Right, this is the recommendation of the insurance carriers to deny the claim associated with a broken windshield. Any questions? If not, what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer.
I would move to issue the disallowance in accordance with our,
Recommendation from the insurance carrier.
thank you.
Right, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Is there any questions or discussion relative to the motion to issue the disallowance consistent with the recommendation of our insurance carrier? If not, all those in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Item 6B1, potential revision to Chapter 3 of the ordinances related to cooperative purchasing. And I don't know if this is Jamie or Administrator Leonard or Michael.
Let's go with the
Who would
last.
like to be first?
Let's go with Corp Counsel to start.
Sounds good. Jamie Polly from the Parks Department actually got us started down this path just with a question about utilizing potential new cooperative purchasing agreements and the process for that. And as we took a look at our procurement code, which is in your packet, and I'm sorry, the red line version with the changes, for some reason, sometimes when I send things, the red lines don't come through, so you don't have the red lines. So I'll explain the changes as we go through here. But as we were looking at our existing procurement code, it talks about how cooperative purchasing can be used, but it doesn't really explain how. And so to give our staff some good guidance on the how, we thought about taking a stab at adding some language and making it clear how cooperative purchasing interacts with our other procurement requirements, and kind of memorializing that for future individuals who have the same question that Jamie did. So starting in the procurement code, section 3.02, subsection D, that's the existing cooperative purchasing section. And right now it simply says that purchasing agents of the county may conduct purchasing transactions in cooperation with a municipality or municipalities that have agreed to create a consortium to administer, sponsor, or conduct purchasing transactions under a joint contract. But it doesn't talk about adding, joining additional consortia or what we look for in consortia. So the first change that's proposed is an additional paragraph on this section D, which says, purchasing agents are permitted to join and utilize any cooperative purchasing consortium that is designed and administered for the use and benefit of public or governmental entities. Participation in any cooperative purchasing consortium not designed and administered for the use and benefit of public or governmental entities must first be approved by the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. So the rationale for that was, we want to make it clear to staff that if there are existing municipal, public, governmental consortia that are being utilized, we want to make it easier to get the best prices from those consortia. If there are outside, private agency consortia, we also want to be able to utilize that, but because they're not specifically designed and administered to benefit public agencies, we want to make sure there's some oversight to those decisions. Then the other changes in the procurement code are in section 3.05, relating to the existing purchasing thresholds. So what's not clear in our existing code is when you engage with a cooperative purchasing consortium, can you just go there and take their best price and move on? Well, that kind of defeats the spirit of the procurement code. So the idea here is to add language first in the small purchases section that says, when utilizing cooperative purchasing, the lowest available price through a single distinct cooperative purchasing entity may be considered as one quotation for the purposes of this section. So for small purchases right now, county procurement agents are required to solicit at least 3 quotes from businesses. So this would say you can get a price from a cooperative purchasing consortium, and that's one of your quotes. So if there's a better price out there, this doesn't preclude us from getting the better price that's not through a consortium, and we still have to do that investigation and get those quotes. Added the same exact language for subsection C, which is small purchases for intergovernmental agencies. That's airport, ADRC, North Central Healthcare. And we added a subsection E that talks about public works. And this also was kind of a gap in our existing procurement code because Wisconsin law has specific, very, very specific rules about public works, and then not so specific rules about procurements for non-public works. So our procurement code reflects currently our rules for non-public works, but I wanted to make it clear to people who are reading this 10 years down the road that any procurement for a public work or public construction project where the project exceeds $25,000 in value must be let by contract to the lowest responsible bidder and must be bid pursuant to the requirements of Wisconsin Statute 66.0901. Such bidding shall be consistent with the requirements of Section 4 below, which is our existing bidding requirement. And that language is consistent with the existing Wisconsin law on public works. Just kind of gives our staff better guidance about when you're in the procurement field and you're trying to make these decisions looking at our procurement code, just making it clear that there is this rule about public works. I want to set it out in our code so it mirrors state law so that if there's any questions, it's very clear what applies. Trying to find the next change.
That entire section new then?
The entire public works section is new, yes. and it's completely pulled from Wisconsin statute 660901, except for the requirements of section 4 below, because that's unique to our code. Then in the discussion of bids, and this is subsection 4, so 3.05 sub 4, there is a change. There's a new item 14, cooperative purchasing, that says, when utilizing cooperative purchasing, the lowest available price through a single distinct cooperative purchasing entity may be considered as one independent sealed bid for the purposes of this section. And there's a similar one for requests for proposals. Number 9, under requests for proposals, when utilizing cooperative purchasing, the lowest available price through a single distinct cooperative purchasing entity may be considered as one independent proposal for the purposes of this section. So making it clear that cooperative purchasing gives us the advantage of we get to join those cooperative purchasing agreements, and we can consider their low price as one of the prices, but we still have to go through the procurement process as far as if the threshold of what we're buying requires us to go out for bids or request proposals, we still have to go out and do that. We can just consider these prices as one of the potential prices. I think that's everything. Just making sure. That looks, oh, of course, when you have a lawyer looking at things, I find other things. So this is 3.06 subsection 4, the leases section. I just added a line that says, all leases shall be reported to the finance director and corporation counsel upon execution. This is just to combat a previous, I won't call it an issue, but just a lack of communication between departments about making sure that if there's a lease, the finance department is aware of it in case it needs to be reported to our financial advisors or as a part of an audit, making sure risk management knows about it, so in case we need to get additional insurance. Subsection B, for leases with option contracts, there's an additional requirement that the purchasing agent has to consult with the finance director before making determinations to enter into a lease with option contract. And again, just to understand the financing requirements, making sure that when we're entering into these leases, we have those financial pieces that some people don't understand, but our finance director does, accounted for before we run through those issues. And those are the changes that are being proposed. Again, the idea on cooperative purchasing is really to try to make the process clear for individuals who are purchasing agents and are looking to engage in some of these cooperative purchasing agreements, to make that process easier so we don't have to wonder, hey, do we have to come back to the committee every time we find a new cooperative purchasing agreement, get that approved? And then the process of how does that fit with our existing procurement process? Can we just go through the consortium, or do we need to follow our procurement process and get a good price from the consortium, which is how I read the law and the intent behind our procurement code. So I'm going to stop talking now, and if you have questions, let me know, or if Administrator Leonard or Parks Director Polly have anything to add, feel free.
I think Mike did a very good job. So, not to be the historian in the room, but in a procurement code from a long, long ago, we had a provision that Mike just referenced. The idea that for every new cooperative purchasing entity that we could utilize, we had to come and get county board or committee approval, which isn't overly workable. And at the same time, we had a deficit that Mike just alluded to that said, hey, you can use cooperative purchasing as just a blanket, which we should use cooperative purchasing, but we should use it in the way Mike alluded to. It's an additional piece of information. Not always are the cooperative purchasing, the consortia, are they the best price, but they're a good thing to have as you start to negotiate. If you did put out a RFP and you know what the cooperative purchasing price would have been. So it's a source of information. It's not the end-all be-all. And at the same time, we don't want to have to run back to a committee each time to say, hey, there's a new cooperative purchasing entity that exists. For example, and they do exist. States have them. I think what prompted this was Jamie looking at the Minnesota consortium out of Minnesota.
Sorry. Yeah, it was the Cooperative Purchasing Venture. It is out of Minnesota.
Right.
Something different.
Yeah.
Has specific, I was looking at it specifically for like our splash pad equipment, which is very specialized equipment. There's only 2 companies in the nation, well, one in Canada, one in the US, that provide this equipment. One was on a cooperative purchasing, the other one is under this new one, which we weren't members of, so to try to get the equal pricing to compare, I need the ability to look through the other one is why I brought up the question.
And then also these consortia, they get new ones start. The National Association of Counties has a procurement consortia that is good for us to look at. So I think Mike's attempt here, at least as it relates to the amendments regarding cooperative purchasing, is to provide guardrails, but also flexibility. So it's a kind of hitting that mark, and I think it's a good way to go. With respect to some of the other cleanup, again, I think it's an iterative process, our ordinances, to make those better each and every time. My long-term vision, of course, is to have all leases and contracts, not on the back end have to go through and legal be advised and finance be advised, but I want to do a more comprehensive revision that before we sign any contract or lease is a contract, but before we sign those things, it's legal, finance, and administration on the front end. I think we do well, but that's not required under our ordinances yet, and we don't have bandwidth to do it all the time yet. So we'll get there, but I think the revisions that Mike laid out and the rationale behind them are perfectly on point.
Like, do we define consortium? Because we use the word consortium in there, but then the request is to join a venture. Does the ordinance allow the joining of a venture? Or do we need to define consortium and/or other organization that would allow for collaborative purchasing?
I think you might have been a lawyer in a past life, Mr. Chair. It's a good question. We kind of define consortium as an entity that's designed and administered for the use and benefit of public or governmental entities. It's not specifically a definition. It's in that initial paragraph about what purchasing agents are allowed to do. I would use the common definition of consortium if we didn't further define it, which maybe that's not a word that a lot of people use every day, but a group or gathering of entities to pursue the betterment of all entities. So I
Again,
think,
let me ask the question, should we define it in your quest for clarity? The request is to join a venture
sure.
versus a consortium, which the venture is perceived to be a consortium, but is not defined. I don't,
Well,
do you see that?
if I may, so that's the name of that particular one. That's what they call themselves. But then like other ones we are members of is Sourcewell. It doesn't say consortium or venture. It's just a cooperative purchasing program that's for government agencies. Then we also have Omni, which is a cooperative purchasing. So I don't know if the word consortium, like they're not all called that or even use that in their definition. So, but they're all those we're members of already. Like we're members of Sourcewell, we're members of Omni. So I guess, I don't
Yeah.
know if that helps. There's the one particular one that has this, that I looked at, has that in the name, but they're all different.
I think, I mean, ultimately, that's a question for the committee and the board as to whether you think a definition is required. I personally wouldn't advise that it would be required, only because you can only define things to a certain degree, and you have to have some flexibility as far as applying the words to practice. So in Jamie's instance, if Jamie would come to me with a question about, can we join this entity that's called a venture and it has these characteristics, it's a set of governmental agencies that come together to get the best prices on individual equipment, I would say that's a cooperative purchasing consortium, and it's permitted under our code without having to further define the term. So I'm comfortable the way it is, I guess partially because I wrote it and I feel comfortable with it. But if the committee thinks further definition would be helpful, I'm open to that as well.
Supervisor Marshall. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, on small purchases, does that include services? And if, say, we're purchasing $15,000 of services a year, but we have a 3-year contract, so it's essentially $45,000, does that fall under that threshold?
Sure. Another good question. Elsewhere in the existing procurement code, there's a provision that says you can't artificially divide purchases. So it depends what the service is. This would apply to services. There isn't a distinction between services and equipment like I think there used to be in one former iteration of our procurement code. But if we're buying this or purchasing the same service from an entity and we know that we're going to be doing that, hey, we're going to purchase it now, we're going to purchase another set in April and another set in November. One of those purchases is under the threshold, but all of them combined are over the threshold, then we should be getting the quotes for the small purchase. Those are the kind of questions that I get quite a lot, because that's, in practice, how do we do this? And I think our purchasing agents are pretty good at flagging that issue and consulting with legal if they have those questions.
So the aggregate value can go over a number of years?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? And I did look up the meaning of consortium. Consortium is an association of two or more individuals, companies, organizations, or governments with the objective of participating in a common activity or pooling their resources for achieving a common goal. It goes on. So I think that covers joint ventures and others in the common. I don't know, it's not blacks, but it's.
That's a much cleaner definition than what I tried to articulate, so thank you.
All right, other questions? If not, what are your wishes? And Mike, well, thank you for those other updates as well. Any questions, or what are your wishes relative to the proposed changes to the ordinance? Supervisor Lemmer.
If it's appropriate, I would then move to accept the revisions to Chapter 3 of the ordinances related to cooperative purchasing.
And forward to the county board for action.
Yes.
What I thought. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Marshall, or Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. Item B2 is consideration of allocation of funds for repair of the ice arena, for repairs of the ice arena, consistent with previous discussion from Park Commission relative to short-term repair strategy. That's a mouthful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Parks
So we are
Director
here, or I'm here today to give you an update on where we are with the ice arena and repairs and where this gets us in the short term. Supervisor Mask is here as well to provide some input on the Park Commission's discussions to this and how we came to our current ask for this portion of it and going forward. So I put some background in your packet. I guess I don't need to go through all of it. I don't think I've given a presentation to the county board a few times, but in short order, the rinks that we currently have, one is 50 years old and one is 40 years old, and the equipment we bought to run those facilities was bought used in 1974 from Eagle River, so we don't know exactly how old the actual refrigeration system is, but we know it's at least 50. So we have been working with those. We've been, keeping them running up to this point. When we redid the West Side Master Plan that the county board approved in 2023, we had identified the age of these facilities, among other facilities within Marathon Park that needed to be looked at. With that, the county board approved kind of this idea or this long-term strategy of potentially rebuilding the ice arena in the future with a brand-new facility, knowing the age and the current conditions of ours, potentially in the area where the highway department is. And then that was kind of the plan and going through with the West Side Master Plan. This past year, we had some significant issues with Rink 2, which is the 40-year-old rink, so newer than the older rink, where we were almost to a point where we weren't going to have that second sheet of ice this season. We had significant breaks. We have multiple corrosion within the lines. We were losing brine on, tens and hundreds of gallons per day at one point, and we had to figure out what was going on. So that's some major concerns on our entire arena, knowing that that's the newer of the two arenas. However, the Arena 1, which is the older rink, when I say 1 and 2, Rink 1 is your main rink. If you've ever been in the rinks where like Wausau West and Wausau East play their home games, it's got the most seating. It's to the east. Or no, it's the western rink. And then the one on the east is really more of a pole shed. That's what we consider our Rink 2. It's got very small bleachers for 100, 150 people. It's where our youth hockey mainly plays out of. So our Rink 2 for 50 years has been home to Wausau East and Wausau West hockey. So 2 high schools there, because Wausau East is now a co-op with Merrill. And then over the years, Storm has been added, which is a co-op for all of the girls in the area. It's East, West, and Everest. I believe Mosinee even plays on their team. Their home ice. And then we have figure skating. We have the Wausau Cyclones, which is an NH3L team. And then we have about a 500-member youth hockey association that's mainly the Wausau area and surrounding areas, even out to Athens, Edgar, come into the Wausau youth. And then we have 3 adult leagues that play whenever there's ice available. So knowing that this is the facility that we operate, the Park Commission met on this a number of times. For one, working on the West Side Master Plan and what that long-term plan would be, and then with our issues this year of knowing that we have to do something to even know whether or not we're going to be able to put ice in Rink 2 for the 25-26 season. We did open up the floor in many areas. You can actually see it now that you go into the rink because the ice is out. We made it through the season, but you can see where we've dug up, we've replaced piping, but we don't know what's all underneath the concrete in that sheet of ice. So the Park Commission met a number of times to talk about this, and looking long-term at the options, the first question is, do we stay in the ice business? From the Park Commission, that was a resounding yes, based on the economic impact of the facility, the number of users of the facility, and Supervisor Mask can speak to that a little bit more in her history. And then the other options were to construct the brand-new 2-sheet facility, which we did have a grant to look at that and the feasibility of that and making it into a safe room. The option 2 was to rebuild our current main sheet, which is the larger seating rink of the 2 in its current location, and then fix Rink 2. And then option 3, or option 4, I guess it was, is just fixing what we've got and doing business as usual. One of the major needs in our area is a year-round sheet of ice. DC Everest is the only one that has year-round ice. We are missing a huge potential of revenue source by not having year-round ice, but our facilities are just not built to that. They're basically pole sheds with no heating, cooling, other than the ice facility itself. So where we are at right now, the Park Commission, long-term, is looking at the option of rebuilding our current sheet in its location and fixing Rink 2, so that we basically have kind of a new facility in its current location without taking the entire Rink 2 down. But in the short term, because that's a couple years out with funding, with planning, figuring out what we do during a season when an ice sheet is down, we have some short-term fixes. So we have been working with our architects who've been working on our FEMA grant where we look at the safe room and the other options, and talked with a refrigeration expert engineer. And one of the short-term fixes that can get us through the next 3 to 5 years is to purchase a mat system, which is a portable mat system that would be rolled out on top of the current concrete of Rink 2. It would then be, piping would be connected to our current refrigeration system. And then there would be some repairs in the refrigeration room because we have some aging infrastructure in there that we have a return valve for Rink 2 that is this large Y. And I provided that, I think, in an update when I gave the county board an update on the current facility. If that were to burst, that's extremely dangerous to our employees, as well as it would take out both sheets completely, because that's where all the brine goes through. We have an indirect system, so we have an ammonia system, which in itself is very dangerous. But the ammonia and the brine don't ever actually touch. The ammonia just cools the brine, and we have them separated. But we have some life safety things in the refrigeration rooms that we have to make sure we have in place too, in case there were ever an ammonia leak for safety of our employees, which we have most of that in place now. There's a few updates we need to make with that. So the whole fix, and then we have a cooling tower that operates the entire facility that 2 years ago failed, and we almost were sitting in front of this committee asking for a new cooling tower at that time. Our timing wasn't in our favor there, so we made some temporary fixes, but that cooling tower does need to be replaced. So going forward, looking at these temporary fixes, it's not a small amount, as I'm asking is $940,000 would cover all of that. The cooling tower, the mat system, the piping upgrades, the refrigeration room upgrades, as well as the design for that, because we have the engineer that can put the actual design in place. I did meet with him this morning, and he's really impressed with actually how well our facility is put together and the location of our refrigeration room to Rink 2. So he's hoping that that number could be a little less, but at the current moment, that's the pricing and the amount we'd ask for. So I would say that that would be up to, the request is up to that amount. And we have another fix we have to make to our dehumidification system that we would take out of our small project fund. So this has gone through Park Commission, Environmental Resources Committee, and it is in front of you for approval of that request to move on to the county board, but to identify the funding source, which I know that our finance director has some options for you, but maybe before we get to the finance director, Ms. Supervisor Mask can speak on why the county or the Park Commission came to this particular.
Supervisor Mask.
Thank you. I'm a little hoarse today, so excuse me. We discussed this for months, and we really put a lot of thought into it. Now, our Park Commission is Wausau and Marathon County, so this isn't just a Marathon County decision from Park Commission. But we were given 4 choices. Number 1 was to, if the Highway Department moves, to build a brand-new 2-sheet, 12-month-a-year facility over there and really make it a beautiful facility. And that one, as much as that would be like a pipe dream, the second choice was to upgrade the facilities we have now, which would be some in future, not right now. But that one would be less expensive. It wouldn't give us everything that we want from the first choice. But in the immediate, we need to fix what we have, or we're going to lose what we have, and that would cost us more money than anything. I'm a hockey mom, My kids played Wausau youth hockey, they played Mosney youth hockey, and then they both lettered at DC Everest. And so I've been involved with hockey with the Cyclones and the Papermakers for a long time. It is, they always say if you put a kid on ice, they don't get into hot water. And there's a lot of truth to that, but we have so many users of this facility, and it would be a shame to lose any of it. We are proposing to go to a 12-month sheet of ice, which would really be nice. To have two would be even better, but to talk everybody into doing that is not going to work. But I think that the park department has done a phenomenal job keeping this one running as they have. I don't know how they managed to fix this and keep everything up and running, but it's amazing, because that stinking thing is almost as old as I am. And I think that if we would go through with these repairs and eventually do the safe room, if we stay at our present location and make improvements to go to a 12-month one sheet of ice, we will still have a really great facility. We have so many users that it would be a shame to lose this, and so I hope you support this.
Administrator Leonard's request.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that was about 10 to 15 minutes. You guys got about 50 years of history, and this is a complex issue, so I asked the chair if I could just, at least from my perspective, from the staff perspective, kind of frame what I think the issue that is going to confront the county board is that you're being asked to take up, because there's a lot. There's the long-term discussion that quite honestly still needs to happen, and then there's the short-term consideration that, again, the county board needs to take up. I always like to start with, you hear this a lot during the budget, that the county board gives policy direction and answering three questions. You start with, what services do we deliver? The threshold question relative to services, do you stay in the ice business? Now, there's the long-term decision. That is yet to be answered by the county board. A lot of discussion about the Park Commission, and Supervisor Mask and her colleagues on that commission have talked a lot about it. The last direction from the county board relative to the ice business, for 50 years or thereabouts, you've said yes. But recognizing relatively recently that you do have these long-term needs, you allocated funding to study it. And Jamie alluded to this. This is that FEMA study to look at what funding might be available for long-term substantial fixes. But I want to be very clear that the county board has that long-term decision it needs to make. Why you're here today is because, as Jamie laid out, and as did Supervisor Mask, there's the short-term consideration of short-term fixes because of these facilities are in disrepair. And the direction from Park Commission to staff was, and this is my characterization of it, but because we don't know what that long-term future is, we want a short-term, what's the short-term strategy we could adopt that is the most flexible? Again, this is my characterization, but we got needs relative to dehumidification, we got a cooling tower needs, we got the ice. And staff then took that direction of, okay, the goal is, from Park Commission, develop a very flexible, the most flexible, short-term fix. And when I say flexible, I mean that would have value if the county board says we want to stay in the ice business, or if we don't. So staff put their thinking caps on, and credit to Jamie and her team, that's what they did. They sat down and said, okay, what are our needs to deliver on our, keep that in the short term, keep delivering ice as a service, what might that look like? And that's what Jamie said, that MAT system. Our short-term solution went from ripping out the concrete in Rink 2, fixing all the lines, laying new concrete. But again, when the direction is, hey, let's be as flexible as possible. Jamie, Chris, and I met, and we, again, spitballing ideas, brainstorming, and then her and her team worked with vendors. This is that short-term flexible solution. And what do I mean by that? If you decide to get out of if the county board decides long-term, you know what, we're going to provide notice to these user groups, despite all the good that Supervisor Mask just laid out, the votes aren't there to build a new ice sheet and stay in the ice business, you can sell the mat system. You're not going to get dollar for dollar, of course, what you paid for it. You can also, the cooling tower and the dehumidification system, those are assets that you can arguably, there's some resale market for. Similarly, if you stay in the ice business, the cooling tower, the dehumidification system remain valuable, and even that mat system, you can use it in the existing Rink 2 with making improvements to it if you do some sort of kind of middle of the road fix, or you can still sell it if you build all brand new, or you could use it as envisioned in the West Side Master Plan. There's the idea of a skating ribbon that maybe you can use it there. So it's more, it's flexible. The plan, the overall plan is flexible in that way I just laid out. So that's from a large scale, kind of why are you here? Staff were asked to put on their thinking caps about, hey, what would flexibility look like? And that's the plan that they brought forward to Park Commission. Park Commission moved that, said, yes, that's what we think is appropriate, moved it on to the Environmental Resources Committee. They said, we want this, we believe this short-term flexible plan of these capital expenditures is what we're recommending, and that's that approximate $944,000, I think it's 944, is that right? 940. That was moved forward to this committee to identify a funding source. So then the next person that needed to put on a thinking cap was Sam, to talk about what might be a combination of funding sources to accomplish this if you want. And again, it's going to, whatever you do, this committee and ultimately the county board, it's a 2/3 budget amendment because this is in the middle of the year. You didn't budget for these expenditures. But Sam can walk you through kind of what are the options available to you. Just to recap, however, you have spent a fair amount of your contingency on recent projects, but you have reserves, and Sam can talk through some other revenue options. But I want to make sure that people understand that, and this committee understand, that's kind of how we got here. And so I see Supervisor Mask has some data.
I just have a question. When this goes to vote for county board, if it passes this committee, is it 2/3 of the members present?
Yes.
Thank you.
But I hope that summary is kind of helpful on how you got here. And just, I know this was talked about at ERC, this short term, when we say short term fix, Jamie, do you just want to, like, what's the life expectancy of the MAT system and the other things that would walk us through during the interim while the FEMA study continues and the board would have to discuss that long-term vision?
Yeah, the lifespan of the MAT system is 10 to 12 years, and that's if you leave it out. So we have the fair to contend with. We have to allow those buildings to be used by the fair in their current form. So MAT system would be rolled up after each hockey season, stored and rolled back out. So it may, in talking with the company, it may reduce the lifespan slightly, but if we take good care of it, it shouldn't be a huge amount. So I would say about 10 years we have as the average lifespan for that MAT system. But the MAT system, also looking at the timing, because any work to have ice this next year to guarantee that we have a facility in Rink 2 for 25, the work has to either be done before the fair or after the fair, which are both fairly short windows when you look at ordering this MAT system, or you try to get a contract in if we were going to redo the floor completely. But just the price difference between if we were to redo the floor and put a new refrigeration in the floor, we were looking at about a $6 million price tag versus the MAT system and our temporary fixes, which even some of the line fixes, and talking with our engineer today, that we put in to connect the MAT system are also long-term. If we decide to move forward later with fixing Rink 1 and fixing Rink 2, these in-ground piping fixes are longer-term piping fixes. So they're not temporary, we won't have to redo them. They fix and they can be tied into for any future system we'd put in.
So should we go to Sam for the financing options and then have the discussion?
Yeah, okay. So the way that you can fund this is a couple of different options. So the first way you can fund it is through borrowing. You can do a short-term borrowing, such as a notes payable. You can bond out for it. I would never recommend doing it more than the life of the asset that you gain. With that, there are associated costs with bond counsel, interest, things of that capacity. The next thing you could do is out of the 2024 ARPA funding covered $1,286,996 of utilities. You could utilize the reserves that we now have in the general fund to help support this project. You could just take it from the general fund reserves to cover part of it or all of it. And then the last thing to look at is the excess revenues in the Parks Fund. So that's going to be coming from the timber sales. You can do it as a restriction on the 2024 excess funds. You can do it over multiple years. You can take a loan from the general fund and pay it back again if you're going to span that over the years. That's usually associated with some sort of interest to be paid back to the general fund as well.
What is the balance in the Parks Fund, Reserve Fund?
At the end of 2023, it had a negative. We're on track to have about 330,000 since it increased as of right now. I'm not sure what the carryovers are just yet, but 620,000 roughly. So there's about 300,000 that you may be able to utilize from the parks reserves.
Are there questions for Vice Chair Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How many other counties in Wisconsin own ice rinks?
I can't tell you how many counties, I mean, there's ice rinks all over the state that are owned either by a county, a city, private entity, or a school district. So I don't have the top off my head.
And we have a number of users. We have people, the Wausau School District, the owners of the NH3L team. You've got Everest, Mosinee, in the Merrill School District. Are any of them for giving capital toward this project? Are the users contributing?
Not towards these repairs. If we look at long-term fixes, then we have started conversations with all of them. They're behind it. Like the conversations with the school district, that if we were to improve the facility, then they would be responsible for shelling out we would provide the shell, they would put anything in their current area. Long-term, they are in support of moving this forward. Nobody has committed any funds at this time, but for the fixes, just to keep it operational, no, we have not gotten any from them.
But if it's a 10-year, if we're extending the life by 10 years, that's capital. That's not a repair.
Well, I don't think we're necessarily extending the life of the facility 10 years. There's still a lot of other issues with the facility. We're giving ourselves time to be able to put ice on the floor for possibly up to 10 years. But if we're relying on this MAT system for 10 years and not looking at the entire facility, then that's essentially county board saying we're not going to be in the ice business anymore because the facilities are well beyond their useful life. They're not going to last. This is a short-term repair to get us to that longer-term fix.
So what is my understanding was that if this was put into place, it was for up to 10 years. So is this to cover 2 years of ice, 3 years of ice?
That's up to the county board and how you want to move forward.
Can I offer something on that? I think your question is very well put, Supervisor. The challenge, and this is my least informed person in the room response to this, but as Jamie alluded to, there are a lot of other factors with respect to the building. So roof, or particularly, is it rink 2 is the challenge for roof, or both? Both. So there, I hesitate to give you, this is my old lawyer risk mitigation hat. I'm not going to say, hey, the building's going to last 10 years. The short-term fix, the flexibility of this fix does keep you in the ice business, but I don't want to leave you with a belief that the need to have a pressing conversation about what the future looks like doesn't go away. We do need some direction there. Otherwise, we're going to be in this kind of recurring emergent cycle of deferred maintenance. Something will happen, and then you'll need to either fix that issue or implement a long-term fix. The idea, your strategy or kind of the underlying premise of your question about are the user groups going to be looked at to be a funding source? I think very clearly that's the second policy question the board always has to answer, right? Like, or third, perhaps you look at it that way, is what services do we deliver, right? At what level and at what cost? Well, what is the expectation of the county general taxpayer relative to the capital stack? It's very similar to the conversation you had about the Regional Forensic Science Center. What is the funding breakdown that is acceptable, or the conversation, quite honestly, you had with North Central Healthcare and the aquatic therapy pool? What is the expectation? Is the county board out of the ICE business, regardless of what that capital stack looks like? Are you willing to continue to do it if those other users sign, I'm just making stuff up, but sign long-term contracts for use and contribute capital? Or are you comfortable with a scenario in which the county general tax levy or borrowing is going to be responsible for the initial capital outlay and then the ongoing operations? Those are 100% county board decisions, not staff. Those are hard ones. There is no way, I'm going to say something you all know, whatever you do, some people are going to be mad on the long-term side. There are people that are going to say, why are you in the ICE business if you decide to stay in it? Because not every county is in the ICE business. This is a school district or municipality, pick your thing, they should pay. And then there are going to be people that if you decide to get out of the ICE business, are going to say, oh my God, what are you doing? This is so good for our community. It's a great asset from an economic development standpoint and just a general quality of life. But that's not a staff. I mean, if you're inferring that we are advocating for one or the other, please let me disavow you of that. We bring you options, you make decisions. And this is that first short-term step. How I feel about ICE or any other staff person feels about ICE is immaterial to this conversation. It's entirely how you feel about it and your constituents and who else you want to base your decision on. We can give you information, but that's where our role stops.
I guess I'd just like to make sure that we get a complete picture. Like if we're talking ICE now and you're talking roof 2 months from now and you're talking building a year from now, we need to make a decision based on the total cost of this project, not piecemeal. And it would be really helpful if we did have a capital commitment from our the people who benefit from this. I know that in my district, we have the Green Heck Fieldhouse, so the taxpayers of DC Everest are supporting that ICE. And so it's a little difficult to ask people from Stratford to support something that is used by user groups that aren't from Stratford.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. I just had a question over what would happen if, say, we went with, I guess, option 4 and didn't do anything. Do those programs, like how long can you keep the ICE running as of right now?
I can't give you that. That's why we're here. We were 3 weeks late on opening Rank 2 this year because of all the damage that we were finding in the floor. We could turn it on and it could turn on like normal and we could have a nice season. We have both sheets of ice like we have. Or I could turn it on and nothing will happen. And they're connected, so Rank 1 could fail. So I can't give you that. All I know is that what we found this year by the issues that we had is that the piping is corroded in Rank 2 to the point where we had major brine leaks, and we were lucky to get it up and running without coming here sooner. So, I mean, hopefully we made enough repairs where we could turn it on and we could have ice, but we won't know that till we turn it back on. If I may, just to a couple of the points previously. So the bigger picture is that longer-term conversation, because we know so this is the short term. The longer-term conversation is what do we do in the future? But because of what I just mentioned, as far as we don't know what we don't know until we turn on the ice again in the fall. This is a way to make sure that we guarantee we have ice in the fall on both sheets until we have that bigger conversation of what the future is, because the future is there is repairs beyond this that need to be done to the facility. And that's not anything new. I've had this on our capital improvement plan that's been presented to the county board as long as I've worked here, and I'll be here 8 years. So it's not a new, this isn't a new item. This is it's a 50-year-old facility that's had deferred maintenance like many of our facilities. So this is the picture of just making sure we're operational as we have been for this upcoming year. That bigger discussion will come. But also to the point of the Wausau School District it goes beyond the Wausau city borders. So we do have people out in the county that attend Wausau School District and are on those teams. Youth hockey extends beyond the city of Wausau borders too. So when we bring that bigger term picture, I will have numbers for the county board as to how many people are on those teams and those organizations. Even the figure skaters travel here that can provide you a bigger picture too of there may be, I know there's kids from Athens and Edgar that are on youth hockey. Maybe not as far as Stratford, those type of things, but this is a larger county facility used by county people rather than just the city of Wausau. And same with Everest. Everest goes beyond Everest.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. And the reason I ask that is because in talking to constituents and talking to people who are closely aligned with the hockey, with the users, essentially, the conversation was, if this rink doesn't exist, these programs stop existing as well. And that's my concern is there's a lot of people that use this facility, and without it, there is no, I asked the question, well, if this place closes, well, can't you go to another one? And they've said literally every other facility within a 50-mile radius is booked with their own programs. So we essentially end those hockey programs, those ice skating programs. Every program that exists because of this ends with that decision. And that's what I'm really concerned about is if we don't move forward, do we just shut out a bunch of families immediately without making a decision and without moving forward? So that's really what I'm concerned about. I don't want that to happen because I feel like we are going to hurt a lot of families in Marathon County by deciding to either do nothing or to move towards getting out of the ice business without a long-term solution for them.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is this an enterprise fund are we subsidizing this as a county?
Yeah, currently, so our ice revenue is our third largest revenue source of everything that we do, because all of our user groups do pay as the highest ice rate in the area. We charge more than Everest, we charge more than Merrill-Mosinee. I mean, we're not absorbently high. But because we're only a seasonal facility too, so we don't get that same revenue in the summer. The county currently subsidizes this by about 29%. We're about 71% cost recovery. It is part of our general fund. If we did an economic impact study with an improved year-round facility, and we would reduce that subsidy by if we include a capital amount in there that would be put away for capital each year, then reduce that subsidy to about 20%. If we take out the capital amount that we currently don't put in, then we would be breaking even. We could get to that point. And there's still more work that would have to be done with that in the long-term solution, and I would present that economic impact study and the operation analysis with all of that. But long story short, yes, we do subsidize this right now. If we were to go to a year-round, there are a lot of potential to reduce that subsidy quite a bit.
So just that study that you referenced, is that simply a FEMA study or was there more to it?
Well, we kind of did it selfishly to try to get this study done because there was no county funding to study the ice arena. So I had talked with Phil Rentmeister, and he had heard about this safe room study, and safe rooms are becoming a very large push by the federal government for communities because school facilities used to be considered your community safe rooms, but The majority of the schools right now are not built to those standards anymore and have too many windows, and there's a whole list of why. So in talking with our representative from Wisconsin Emergency Management, we presented like, hey, we have this option in our county where we know these facilities are aging, and we'd like to study whether or not we could rebuild them or repair them. So there's 2 options in the study. And what would be the option? I mean, I've built a ice arena when I was in Minnesota. That was a big project that we did, and most ice arenas are built with push-up concrete panels, and they're a big concrete box. So I'm thinking, that's perfect safe room. Like, we're already building it. Why not get some money for it? And so talking with them, we were awarded the $325,000 from FEMA last year to do the study. So that did cover studying a new 2-sheet facility and making one area of it a safe room. And then the second part of that study, which we're just finishing up now, is to rebuild our current main sheet in its current location and make that a safe room. So on that, can I go into what's on their county board agenda? So on your county board agenda next week, there will be a question for you to support a letter of commitment to providing if we were to accept the grant. So it doesn't obligate the county to do anything to make any of the decisions, but we applied for a construction grant, because once you get the scoping grant, you're very likely, or you should put in for the construction part of it. And so that already had to be in. It's really short deadlines with the state government, or the state management. But we figured the safe room for an ice arena could house a little over 3,000 people based on, we had to do calculations of the school buildings that were around on all the single-family homes at any given time of the day. And the grant ask is for $9.7 million of that, but it's a 75-25% grant, and we won't know until the end of the year. We're not obligated to take it or anything like that. So that is what leads the FEMA grant, the study portion, into the possible construction dollars, because the long term, if we were to build new, it's expensive, and that's where Supervisor Mask was saying, ultimately, the county would be better off to build a brand new 2-sheet facility that would last another 50 to 75 years, and what the benefits of that could do for the community, but the price tag is extremely high. So the second option of building 1-sheet year-round and having that ability to get the safe room money is about 1/3 of the cost, maybe even a little bit more, depending upon how we design it. If that's there and that's our choice, then we can choose to take the grant or not. But if we choose, then we have a 25% match. That's long-term, but that is where the FEMA, selfishly, we needed money to fund a study, and this actually seemed to fit hand in hand because it's a great facility for that type of a safety feature for our community that Marathon County currently does not have.
But that study, that FEMA project is for a new facility, not for this existing facility.
It's for both. We had 2 options of it, and so we finished the new facility. We have all that information completed. We're almost done with the second option, which is for our current facility.
And do you know the status of that FEMA? Because there's so much uncertainty going on at the federal level. Is this part of the uncertainty, or is this 100% not in the uncertainty?
No, this is part of the uncertainty for construction. We have been given notice that all the grant funding that was awarded to us for the study is there and will be paid out. So we continue to put our reimbursements in as normal, and we should see those. That doesn't affect our current study. But any future federal funding is definitely uncertain at this moment. So they advise us just to put in the grant, and we'll work it as we normally would, meeting those deadlines, and as they learn more, then we'll know more. So there's no guarantee that construction money would even be there, no.
Jamie, could you just talk about the depreciation? So if we buy the mat, does it lose 50% of the value right away? Do we have any idea?
I don't have that information, no. I can't say what that would be.
Supervisor Marshall.
I have a question for the finance director. Could the social improvement reserves be used for this if it has a youth element to it?
I believe with board action, it could be. Again, the board can choose to do that through resolution to transfer the funds. As it sits right now, anything in the social improvement funds is for social improvements, and anything in excess of that goes over to working capital. So with that being said, again, this would be a capital, sorry, not working capital, capital improvements fund, my apology.
Can I just say that a different way? So the money you allocated to the Regional Forensic Science Center from the Social Improvement Fund was unrestricted, undesignated, could be used, I think to your point. It would have otherwise, if we had appropriately rolled it over, it would have been in capital improvements. That should be in the general fund. That's functionally no different than spending out of reserves at this point. I would look at it that way. We'll figure out how to affect the transfer, but to your underlying point, those funds that were allocated and designated by the board to be used for the Regional Forensic Science Center could be whatever is left over that's not utilized for the Regional Forensic Science Center. Yes. Short answer, yes, that would be an appropriate use. The other money in the Social Improvement Fund, the answer is no. I mean, that money is designated for social improvement, social services operating activities, so whether that's CLTS, Children's Long-Term Support Funds from the state, child support designated revenues, consortium revenues, those are not able to be used. But those unrestricted funds that were originally county dollars that were allocated to the Regional Forensic Science Center, that answer is yes.
And how much is that?
Well, we haven't closed out the Regional Forensic Science Center project, and quite honest, I met with Chris earlier this week to the earlier question about uncertainty relative to the allocation of federal funds. The reimbursements we are working to get through our $2 million from the federal, on the federal side from that congressionally directed spending we're still working to allocate those. My hope is that the significant balance of the $4 million-ish that was allocated from Social Improvement Fund, the unrestricted funds to that morgue project, will be available. And I'm confident that the significant majority of them will. I can't say all of it. I hope to report back that all of it can be used. But quite honestly, we're just not there yet with our reimbursements and the lack of information we're getting.
And then I have just one other observation, that we don't subsidize downhill skiing. We don't subsidize gym sport, gymnastics. We don't subsidize all of our extracurricular activities. And so without support and capital from the main user groups, Wausau School District, Merrill School District, the NHL, 3L owners, et cetera, I can't support this. So it has value, but we need our user groups to help.
Chair Gibbs has joined us. I would point out, though, that we do subsidize cross-country ski trails, tubing, and other activities. So there's not an arbitrary, we do this or we don't do this. I think we've been selective in the past relative to where we have supported activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree that the users need to be part of a long-term strategy. I just don't agree that this short-term strategy, I mean, that's kind of a short notice to say, hey, we need you to be a part of this short-term solution while we try to figure out what we're going to do. It's kind of unfair to say, we haven't figured out what we're going to do. Let us know, I think that's unfair, but I do agree that they have to be part of a long-term solution. And I think when we bring that facility up or what to do in the long term, I hope to see some input by them too.
So the question that I have, Jamie, is given the uncertainty relative to the capital needs of that facility, is there some assurance that for the next 2 to 5 years that there won't be another request for an emergency capital commitment for the ice arena? I know that's a crystal ball that's hard to look into, but I think we're looking at what are the risks of the county for other expenditures.
Yeah, I think I can pretty confidently say, barring a natural disaster, putting holes in our roof or anything like that, I think I can say that we've been able to maintain this facility very well over the years. I mean, the roof damages that we spoke of before are ones that we've been able to patch and maintain, and I think I can see us continuing to do that over the next, 3 to 4 years for sure. The main issue is with the membrane in the middle section and how the ice comes off it. On low snow years, we don't have the issues, so that's a benefit for us in those areas. Really, the other parts of the facility, we are continuing to manage our compressors. Even though they're over 50 years old, we get them rebuilt every 2 years, so we're not asking to replace any compressors at this point. We just did a lot of updates in the last 5 years to the refrigeration system with re-insulating our ammonia tanks and stuff like that. So we've been really proactively keeping up the facility to the best of our ability. The refrigeration system is the one area where we don't have a lot of control over because it's opening up the entire floor. But everything else in the facility, I feel very confident we can continue to manage as it is for the next 3 to 5 years. Like I said, barring any, tornado that takes off a roof or anything like that. But we're sitting in a pretty good spot facility-wise for the short term.
Supervisor Mask.
The Park Commission, when we discussed all of this, the mindset was that keeping this facility up and running and having a good facility running would give us time to go to the user groups and start fundraising and maybe get some other funds from some of the wealthier organizations. But that was sort of the mindset, is that we can't ask them for money right now, but that we fix our facilities to where they can stay running for a long enough time to make a stab at this and start to coordinate getting funding. That is the goal. We're not going to ask the county for everything.
Supervisor Limmer.
When was the last time you analyzed your fees?
We analyze them every year, a park commission does. And so we actually just raised the usage fees for the ice for the 2024-25 season. We currently have them set to be the same as last season for this coming season, knowing that we're not making any big repairs or anything like that. So, but the park commission looks at them every year.
And I can just add, those were actually, if you think back to your budget, I know it was a long time ago, but you actually ratified an appendix as part of your annual budget approval of all of the fees for service, and those were in that appendix.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've never ice skated really, so that's not in my awareness. Sorry. But I agree with, really with both ideas here, that I think it's a bitter pill to swallow for me, knowing I don't think I've ever stepped foot in that facility. So I'm sure there's lots of people in Wausau who haven't, or the county. But I do not like pulling the rug out from somebody without giving them time to unwind and prepare, and especially if the Park Commission's going to go to these groups to say, we need sponsorship, we need commitment. So, I think I could support this ask as long as there is a lot of planning going on with increasing that revenue, because I'm not happy with the subsidy part of it.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, we have a lot of traveling teams, and they come here. Just like when my kids were in school, they traveled before high school, then after high school, and the high school paid for all that. But the revenue coming into the county, gas, hotels, restaurants, is substantial. And this is a very passionate group of people, trust me. And when they come in from out of town, they spend. So it is a good, and it's good. It's good for kids. It's good for all of our user groups, but you have to keep that in mind too.
Let me ask a question, and maybe it's more to administration. Would there be any openness to amending the resolution if we come up with a funding source out of reserves and we buy the mat, and the mat in 2 years or 3 years, we replace that facility with a new one, and the mat has a value, I don't think we would use a mat in a new facility, given the limitations on its life. Recouping those, the sale of the mat and putting that back into the fund balance.
I think this is an area where staff let you amend resolutions however you want. We could work on some language to capture what I understand your intent of your statement to be, and that, let me just reflect back what I anticipated, or I believe you're intending. If in the future, based on the long-term direction and construction done, the MAT system is no longer necessary for ICE operations, that staff be directed to sell it, and any funds coming from said sale would be returned to the general fund reserve. Short answer is, I believe we have a very competent corp counsel that can draft that and put that in there, and we can certainly do that. Of course, if at any time you wanted to change your mind and tell us to do something else with it, we could do that.
Supervisor Marshall.
Speaking of the tournaments and bringing in people from outside, I know the Turner Center received an excess of $100,000 in room tax dollars from the Village of Weston. So if that would seem to be a avenue to pursue, is room tax dollars from each of the municipalities who benefit.
Yeah, and I'm on the CVB board, I'm vice president, so I can speak to that. And that is for a new facility, if we were to expand, where we could show that we were increasing any room stays or being able to increase our capacity, that would be very well received, and we would definitely do that. For repairs, just for general operations, in my experience, it wouldn't be supported.
However, if you don't do the repairs, you don't have a tournament. So I don't understand why that would not be considered. The repairs allow you to have tournaments for several years.
Supervisor Lemmer, then Chair Gibbs.
I can just speak a little bit to those room tax dollars. They are very restricted, and they're for use to advertise. They are not for operations. So even if we got the 100,000, and I know that because I was president of the Festival of Arts, we are a receiver of room tax dollars, but they are required to be used for advertising.
Chair Gibbs, and then Supervisor Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for getting late to the meeting. I was in another meeting. The question I would have is, we've always talked long-term setting fees so that we have at least some portion of those fees covering not only operations, but some capital. Is our current fee structure covering any kind of capital, or is it only covering currently operations?
Current operations.
And I would just add, we're still subsidizing ICE. We're not, our fees are not set to actually cover our true cost to deliver the service. If we roll in all of our operational costs to deliver ICE, please correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, we're still short on revenue over expense.
Well, if we were to break down just the ice season, I do think we may be priced a little short, but we're priced also in comparison to the area. Like, we can't, in Minnesota, I was charging $220 an hour on ice. If I would charge that now, we would have no users either, and they would just fall apart. Everest charges $140, we charge $155. Merrill charges less, Mosinee charges less. So we are trying to stay with the market, but we cover, so if we're just talking ice, we do, because we run a very minimal staffing too. The problem is the buildings, when I did that cost of subsidy, I look at the buildings year round. So the other revenue we get from rentals of those two buildings, the fair gives us a portion of money for the use of it for those 2 weeks. But those buildings sit empty a large portion of the year because of how they're built currently. If you put a year-round sheet of ice where there's constant activity, tournaments, camps, you have a year-round revenue source versus right now, it's a seasonal. So I didn't really answer your question.
No, I think that's good, and I think the short answer to Chair Gibbs's question is no. We don't fund, we don't set aside a portion of revenues from the ice operations for needed capital.
We actually don't do that for any of our facilities, including the sports complex or anything. Yep.
You're good.
No, but I think the point is that we need to be looking at that, and, we don't want to waste an opportunity to actually have that discussion.
All right. Any other questions or discussion?
I think Sam can, if you do have questions about funding sources, and they're not all created equal, so if you care to have an opinion from your finance director as to what the most logical is, we've been waiting patiently, I know Sam has, to kind of lay those out for you.
Before Sam starts, Supervisor Hart, did you? Okay. All right. Go ahead, Sam.
Perfect. So to recap, the three main sources that you're looking at is reserves, excess revenues, or borrowing. My recommendation would to be using a combination of general fund reserve of 540,000, committing 290,000 of the excess timber revenue from 2024, and then doing a budget amendment for 110,000 of excess revenue of timber funds in 2025. Or the second option would be to use the general fund reserves for the entire thing.
Supervisor Lemmer.
I'm a big planner, and this is not a planned expense, so what is the impact if we were to take those timber? What would the normal use of those timber sales be?
They'd sit in the Parks Fund, so to be used for their operations. You don't have any restrictions on it from your committee. It would sit in there to help the operational aspect of their department.
So is that going to negatively impact operations of the whole parks? Are all of the other parks going to suffer by taking this timber sale money?
No, typically the timber sale revenue went back into the general fund. So any excess revenue from our department, just like any other department, went into the capital fund. So we're talking about hopefully making a park fund where any excess revenue could go in for these capital improvements that we would have. But currently it goes into the general fund, so it wouldn't have any impact on us unless it was for a project that we requested.
So just saying that differently, in '24, as we always do with park timber sales, we try to see into the future and project, and we like to be conservative. The park revenue does to the forestry revenue does to Jamie's point, offset some operations, but if there's excess, what happens is, just like every other department, that excess essentially rolls into the general fund. So '24, what Sam's talking about is, hey, we know where we ended pretty close with respect to '24. So rather than have that go into the general fund, let's take it and utilize it as part of the funding strategy now. And then '25, we're in it. We have a better crystal ball than we did a year ago, but in light of where we anticipate being, let's up our revenue projections for '25, take that increased revenue and rather have it roll into the general fund for '26 or '27, have it used to offset some of this expense. And then the third leg of that stool is the just general reserve.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. And just to help me understand, I believe there was some sort of discussion about potentially obligating future excess timber sales funds to pay back the reserve. Is that an option? I know it gets tricky because we can't obligate future county boards, but is that also an option for funding?
You could put a policy in place to use a special revenue source. It just has to go through the proper channels.
I think Sam's two options are, my administrator recommendation is always simple as best. We can accounting is accounting, and we're talking about where we're going to pull these things. Functionally, it all is reserve. It's a reserve, a general fund reserve conversation. The funding sources always funnel back to that. We're not, even if you would take, hey, we're going to up sales tax projections this year, all that's doing is impacting your general fund reserve in the next year. So the true policy question for you and then ultimately for the county board, because this is going to county board based on process, it's already gone through ERC. The only issue it was sent here for real discussion was about a funding source. The threshold question is, do you want to spend the money or not? And that's a threshold question for you. Staff will, you tell us what you want to do and we'll do our best to do it.
So what are your wishes?
Chairman, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Sam, just a point of clarification. I'm just trying to, so 540 was from reserves, 240 was from 2024 excess timber sales. Where was 110 from?
290 would have been from 2024 excess revenues, and then 110 would be out of the current budget.
Okay, for 2020, technically 2025 projected excess revenues from timber sales. I got you. All right.
Correct.
All right, any other questions, or what are your wishes? What are your wishes? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. I would make a motion to, in support of the resolution and moving it to the full county board with the amendments that you had mentioned, because you wanted to add an amendment to add the sale of the mat, right? So with that amendment included, as written by our Corp Counsel, and with the funding source as the recommendation set by the finance director.
Which, the general fund reserve?
Yeah, the recommendation of, the 540 from reserve, 290 from excess timber sales from 2024, and the 110 from excess timber sales from 2025. Is that right?
There was two options there. The cleaner, simpler one was just 940 from general fund reserves, or the other one that had a combination of funding.
The other one.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion to recommend the county board adoption of the resolution with the funding of 540 from reserves, 290 from excess 224 excess revenue, and 110,000 from 2025 excess revenue from the forest, with a provision that if the mat is sold, that the proceeds from the sale will be returned to the general fund. Is that your motion? Is that a second? Supervisor number seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Does everybody understand the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Well, seeing as how this is going to go to the resolution's going to go to the full board, I'll be in support of the motion going to the full board, only because we have to identify a source of revenue or a source of funding to fund the project. I'm not 100% convinced that I can support the resolution moving forward, but I will support it moving it to the full board for discussion.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the motion? Supervisor Lemmer. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
That motion carries on a 5-2 vote based upon what I heard. All right, thank you. I'm sure we will revisit this issue soon. All right, educational presentations. First, call on the finance director to update us on the 2023 audit plan of action and working capital policies.
So one of the things that we talked about was the working capital policy as it was written to try and enhance it with more plain language writing so that people could understand it a little bit easier. So I drafted up a policy for consideration that would take 2.4 months to 3.6 months. I used sources to kind of come up with this recommendation based off of GFOA, which is the Governmental Financial Officers Association, which is the National League. Their recommendation is no less than 2 months. They don't really have a cap on that, but I wanted to make sure that we had a minimum and maximum. And then the other area that we looked at was GASB. So when we talk about GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, there are 2 applicable standards or pronouncements that kind of fit with the working capital. Number 34 is the basic financial statements, which sets up the framework. Under the management discussion and analysis, we talk about where our funding levels are to maintain fiscal sustainability for long-term strategy. GASB 54 gave classifications, which you have seen in the fund balance memo that was presented last fall, so that it's put in a category that makes sense for the common user. In addition to that, some considerations with the working capital minimum and maximum designations is what is unique to Marathon County. So 2 of our biggest cash flow months, again, working capital is kind of a somewhat fluid term. It is definitive in financial terms, but for governments who are trying to have that strategy for long term, they're talking about cash flow, having a unassigned fund balance available to make sure that you can have some fiscal liquidity to have your short-term obligations met. So one of those things that they talk about is what are our high months that we are dispersing funds. Our high months are usually in April, February, April, August, and September. And that's due to, in February, we have debt service payments. So in 2024, the February payment was $6,081,000. The year for 2025 was 6.5 million. Sorry, it was supposed to be about 6.5 million for 2024, and then 2023 was 6 million. And then we have tax settlement payments that go out for lottery credit and, is it schools? Schools. And then again, in August, there is about 1.2 to 1.3 million of debt service payments that have gone out. And then we have all of the settlements with the townships and municipalities. The other things that are unique to Marathon County are we have a nursing home. Not all counties have a nursing home, which can fluctuate with some of the funding sources. We do have a landfill that can have high capital needs as well. Just to kind of preemptively be prepared to have a little bit more of a buffer in there in our working capital. And then the other thing that we have a substantial consideration into is grants. A lot of our grants are cost reimbursable, so we spend the money before we get reimbursed from the state, federal government, wherever that source may be. Anybody have any questions pertaining to how the policy is written, where the numbers are coming from?
So if I can just add, this isn't here for action. So Sam and I chatted, and there's a couple decision points upcoming for you, but it's really to start the conversation that you've said you want to have, which is updating our fund balance policy. In all honesty, it doesn't, if you go down to 20%, that would change the number that you actually designate as working capital. But the intent, again, just to frame this for all of you, the intent that Sam has been working off of is to make the calculation more I'll call it user-friendly from the reader's perspective. Our calculation, when you read our fund balance policy and actually the math that's been behind it for decades and decades, you would never guess that the equation flows from the words that are on the page. The word problem doesn't match the math problem. She's trying to get the description of the policy, the words, to more closely match what our longstanding practice has been in terms of working capital designation. Because quite honestly, that, my administrator recommendation, it's a good number to hold on to. At least with respect to the general fund, and operationally, we can talk about highways different, but the words just haven't matched. So this is just to start that conversation, talking about what is GFOA in terms of a source. Are they 17%-ish as a recommendation, Sam?
Yeah,
No
2 months.
lower than 17, yeah.
Yep, at the minimum, they say at least 17%.
And counties generally, you recall from your audit, you guys can pull that up, it's available online, you've seen it a number of times. We have the Baker Tilly client portfolio that actually shows we're slightly below what our peers are in terms of working capital. This is to start the conversation. No action today, but ponder what Sam has put here. Let us know what questions you have, what your thoughts are, and then staff will do the work you direct us to do. So if you say, hey, we want you to be more somewhere between closer to 30 or closer to 20, we can draft language. If you want to see what other counties have, I know you've looked to the St. Croix County for budget preparation guidance. We can do the same thing and get you those working capital designations and reserve designations. But this is just, I hope you didn't get freaked out by seeing that in there and think, oh my God, we have to take action today. It's listed under education for that reason, just to start the conversation.
Yes, I'm interested in any thoughts you have relative to the concept. And we'll at a later date, I think, in light of the past county board action, I think we want to take these policies to the county board and get them to adopt them. But I think for the purposes of today, just in broad terms, what are your thoughts, and do you have questions, or would you like additional information going forward? Kurt, you're on.
Yeah, thank you, John. So the question I would have, I think our current policy has served the county well as far as practicality. Now, complication as far as reading it and the math equation, I fully support making it more transparent or more, if you will, user-friendly. The one question I would have is in discussion with the potential adoption of a new policy, have we run the potential definition past our bond counsel to ensure that the bond counsel is fine with how we have drafted it?
I have reached out to them, and I sent them the policy the proposed or consideration this morning so that they can review it in all of the verbiage. But I did have a conversation with them last week on how this affects the bond rating in terms of that.
And so the follow-up would be the question is, did they have any expressed opinion as to a positive, negative, or no impact?
At this time, it's a no impact because when they do the bond rating, it's a collective. It's rated on 4 different categories, but one of them is the financial health of your general fund. So right now, we're in a good spot. But the policy in and of itself won't affect it adversely or positively either way at this point.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? What about you? Are you interested in seeing what some of our comparable counties are doing? Yes, no. I'm seeing a yes. Yes. Yes with a shrug and yes with a yes. So yes, if we could do that. Other questions? If not, Sam, thank you for that update. We will bring it back.
And then I do have the next portion. Are we good to go into that one?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the second part of that is the updated cash and bank procedures. So in the audit findings or discussion, it was about our processes with cash, kind of defining what they were. So finance will now be taking on the bank reconciliation and Workday to monitor. We'll also be working with departments to make sure that they are depositing their cash, that their deposits are recorded, as well as doing the spot audits, which I'll present a schedule to Administrator Leonard in the next week or two, so that it's random of nature, just to go in and compare the receipting software to what's in the cash drawer, and then discuss proper cash handling for each department. We will be able to monitor this so much better through the Workday reconciliation process, because we'll be able to see both the bank side and the Workday side collectively together. Timing of deposits. Checks are usually deposited right away because there's check readers at the individual departments. And then credit cards go through on a daily basis as well. The only thing that was that was a little different is the physical cash. So we do have some departments who might receive $2 a day. They might receive maybe $200 a day. The requirement is that they still need to reconcile daily and have that record in there, and generally have more than 2 people associated with that process. But because it can be costly to make those deposits every day through the different the banking bags and relatively low amounts. So I said under 1,000 a week, it needed to be done weekly. So the encouragement is daily deposits, but if it's done weekly because they are a lower cash receiving department, that would be acceptable.
And again, this is here now for information only, but I think it tries to address some of the issues that have been longstanding relative to the audit reports, relative to the reconciliation process. So I think that at some point in the future, we may want to have it, I don't know if this needs to go to the county board, but maybe have the committee adopt that as a policy, but we can't, it's not agendized for action today, so we can bring it back in the future. I think it would be helpful to just capture those policies as best we can. And I know I want to thank both Sam and Connie for their work on and trying to address this issue.
If I can add, I think to your point, Mr. Chair, there may be some things that need to go through the committee for formal, what I'll say are county board policies. A lot of this, the reason Sam drafted the memo is informational. These are operational changes we're making in light of the kind of message you've given me through my work plan, and then I've then tasked Sam with the hard work. So it's really just telling you that, hey, we're doing these things, keeping you informed of whether it's the cash management and deposit things Sam just talked about. But on the bank rec side, it is an operational change. We're taking something and doing it a little differently between the division of duties between the treasurer's office and finance. The treasurer's office had been responsible for that daily bank reconciliation work. Now we're going to do just what's in the memo. Sam's office, we're going to keep the ERP system, Workday, separate. Sam's staff are going to do the bank reconciliation with a monthly report going to Connie and her team over at the treasurer's office for review, which is still in compliance with the statutes. We're also going to give that monthly report. We'll bring you guys reports, but it's that division of duties that, in my mind, is going to allow, I mean, we have experts in finance that's what they went to school for, that's what they do. And then it allows the treasurer's office, our expertise there, to be more on the receipting of taxes, which is a different priority for the board. So I hope fewer issues with respect to the bank rec, which was a thing that slowed us down in our last audit, was kind of making corrections to some of that reconciliation, getting that cash balance handled. But we're just updating you as to those changes. No action is needed on that. That's a administrator, hey, this is how we're going to do stuff approach. But there may be some things, to your point, Mr. Chair, that, we'd need to walk through the formal adoption process, but we'll bring those through as well.
Supervisor Lemmer and the Vice Chair Marshall.
So will this change our process with approving the claims and question costs? Will we get that bank rec so we have the tie out?
My plan is in July to give you the bank balances or the cash balances that are out there so that you guys can see the differences in there and as a committee be able to have some input or monitoring over it. As far as the bank reconciliation in and of itself, I can provide a summarized version. Just give me some time to draft how that looks, because right now in our system, we have bank transactions that import on one side and then Workday transactions on the other side. I'll look through and see if there's a report that would be appropriate.
And then are we going to start getting monthly financials?
That's the intent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Supervisor Marshall?
I just wanted to echo my thanks for addressing these things that have kind of been a long-term issue, and I think that the county will have a lot more control over these. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Sam? All right, we'll now move on to 7B, update on the Northern Mobile Home Park mediation tax deed process and recommendations from staff relative to amendment to 3.20 of the Code of Ordinance. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you'll recall from a previous meeting, we had discussed this particular parcel and where it was, not only with the human health hazard remediation requirements, but also with some delinquent taxes on the parcel. The taxes are still delinquent at this point, and the committee, you'll recall, authorized us to issue a tax deed and take the property following the notice period expiring early in March. And that was the plan, and we, unfortunately, when the documents were referred to my office and I reviewed the notice that had been sent in November to the property owner, I observed a few errors in that notice, and my opinion and recommendation was to not proceed with the tax deed until that notice was issued correctly, because especially in this area where we're dealing with a parcel of property that has a relatively significant value, and the litigation in this area regarding surplus funds and tax deeds, it's not a good idea to have what is a potential error in the chain of custody and the chain of title. So I did work with our treasurer to update the notice. That correct notice was sent out last week. That notice is also being published. And unfortunately, what that does for the tax foreclosure process for actually the county taking possession of this property is it extends that time period. Under Wisconsin law, that proper notice, once it's sent, it gives the property owner a 90-day period to redeem the property and pay the back taxes. What sending this notice out in 2025 did, though, was allowed us to include an additional year of unpaid taxes on that notice. So we will continue to monitor, whether payments are received, whether they're not received. But we also worked, and Chris Holman, our deputy administrator, did this work, was to work with WPS to resolve some of the issues that we had about potentially having this issue and our lack of ownership over the parcel prevent us from doing some of the human health hazard remediation. WPS has been really pretty good to work with, and we've gotten those issues resolved. So if you drive by on Grand Avenue, you'll probably see some big dumpsters and some work going on. That work is happening as scheduled. We, however, don't have ownership of the property and won't unless taxes aren't paid through that 90-day period. So as a result of kind of some of the conversations we've been having regarding this, kind of the complexities of this process, particularly with the Supreme Court ruling about excess taxes and their proceeds, the treasurer and I and Administrator Leonard all met last week or 2 weeks ago now, it's hard to say, to try to walk through.
And this week, I don't even know, was it last
I
week?
don't think it was this week, but I'm not sure. And Administrator Leonard can kind of share that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I think Mike laid out, my perspective when we met was we needed to address a couple of key things. First, understand what happened and fix the defect that Mike observed when he reviewed that about 10 days ago, perhaps, that letter, which we did. That a revised letter was sent out. It does start the timeline over again. But that issue, this specific issue was resolved. The second thing was, as Mike alluded to, make sure that the human health hazard remediation work proceeded and continues to proceed as promptly as possible. And as Mike said, that work is ongoing. You should see, if you hang out across the street and have lunch, you should see activity happening and loads being taken from that site for ultimate disposal at the landfill. And then the third thing was, let's have a conversation about what that strategy moving forward to mitigate that this happens moving forward. And Mike kind of teed that up very well for me. We had that meeting. And as this committee knows very well, with the conversations we've had relative to Tyler v. Hennepin County, that Supreme Court decision, some of the recent changes in Wisconsin law that we've tried to discuss and have amendments to our ordinances. The process that used to exist with respect to tax foreclosure or taking via tax deed or in rem is a much more legal determination and has more operational restraints and requirements under the recent amendments that, and this is not unique here, this is everywhere, particularly in the state of Wisconsin. This conversation has been happening about, what's the best way to do this? And if you monitor closely your emails from Wisconsin Counties Association, you can go back to September, I think it was, and there was a thread, an email about template ordinances to make some changes based on those laws that I just referenced. And my commitment is to you that we will bring forward some recommendations to kind of, just like what we just talked about with Sam and between the Finance and Treasurer's Office, maintain the Treasurer has statutory obligations in this area, maintain those, but then for those other pieces, put in our ordinance some clear processes for us to move forward and align those duties with where they should live. Put in there the review of the letters or the letters actually being issued through Corporation Counsel's office or however we're going to word it. Mike, Connie, and I are going to sit down and we'll bring you something. But I think looking back to September, there's a reason that conversation is happening elsewhere as well. And making those amendments to that section, chapter 3 of our ordinance, makes sense. So I said this at Extension Education Economic Development last week. My plan is to, within the next, I guess now it would be like 55 days, bring forward some recommendations for consideration. Again, this is purely within the scope of the county board in terms of how you want to organize yourself under home rule and your ordinances. But I think there's some low-hanging fruit to have us align those duties in a way that fits with the operational expertise needed to allow, again, same thing, the same general idea that Connie and Sam just alluded to with the bank rec. The collection of taxes, the receipt of taxes, and engaging with landowners, county's office has a lot to do there. Nobody else can do that. But how we go forward with who's issuing letters and how we're determining which properties to take and how that divestment proceeds. And to add one more wrinkle on top, the county board just recently at your last meeting, you talked about adding covenants. And there was really good discussion at this committee about some of the concerns about that process. We can incorporate that into these amendments. So I have in my mind a couple of ideas on how to do that. We'll bring forward some proposed language changes, kind of mirroring or bringing together rather the template that Andy Phillips offered on behalf of the Counties Association, the discussions you've had here, the discussions you've had at Extension Education, Economic Development about covenants, and we'll bring forward something for you to provide us feedback on within the next 55 days.
So I want to just express my appreciation for their willingness to work on this. I think the revisions of 3.20 are critical, given the complexity and risks associated with the new world order of tax deeds and tax foreclosure, whether it's interim or not, and the resale of those properties because of the statutory timelines, the risks, the class action suits that have been filed, and other things. I just think we need to make sure that we're dotting all the i's and crossing the t's, and making sure our local ordinance is reflective of the changed environment in which we're working. And I look forward to the administrator and treasurer and corporation counsel and others. You know, it sort of affects post-sale too, relative to Kim's duties, relative to the sale of the property through surplus property. So it's a all-encompassing process, but I think we just need to update our ordinance in light of those changing external pressures and statutory changes. Any questions? Supervisor Lemmer.
In the event that, unlikely maybe event that the taxes are paid, will we be able to recoup the money from the remediation we're doing currently?
So the one tool that we wouldn't have would be through a sale of the property. That's the easiest way to recoup the money, and if we're not the owner, we can't do that, but we'll still have other collections options against the owner that we have been preparing on as if, in the event that he had paid the taxes previously. So it won't be as easy to collect for sure, but we still have, we'll have some collection options.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, I guess the only question I have is, in light of the delay and the restart of the 90-day process and the remediation costs being expended currently, and if we close and take the property by tax deed at the end of those 90 days, and hopefully the remediation costs are been clear, in light of the Tyler v. Hennepin case, do those additional costs, are they allowed to be reduced because the tax deed is taken based on the property tax delinquency, not in essence the remediation cost delinquency? So it's a very technical question. I'm just a little concerned that, you know, where we get to when we eventually sell the property. Obviously, the county is going to have the remediation costs in that we've already approved, but is there a potential that we get left in the cold on the remediation costs versus what we're taking it for by tax deed for current costs?
I think I understand your question to be, the remediation costs aren't directly related to taking the property by tax deed. They're not related to the delinquent taxes directly. So when we're selling the property, if we do take it by tax deed, are we able to claim those additional remediation costs instead of submitting the entire surplus, take that out of the surplus that we would normally have to send to the property owner? I would look at it as that is a debt owed to the county, just as the taxes are. And I think we would need to really evaluate whether we can offset the amount of surplus that we're paying them by the amount that they owe us, which we do in other areas. I guess to answer your question is, we'll have to do the analysis of that at the point where the sale occurs. I think there is an argument to be made that the costs are related to getting the property in a condition to sell, and that the remediation costs actually are improving the property's value, which would improve the sale price and ultimately the surplus that is owed. So all those things would have to be taken into account. We'll have to do the analysis based on the facts that we have at the time we're actually prepared to sell if we get to that point. So that's a kind of a non-answer, but that's how I'm thinking about it at this point.
Can I ask a question to follow up on that, Mike, to the Chair Gibbs's question? My recollection relative to the human health hazard order was that are we authorized to put the costs on as a special assessment?
That is what the existing order says as well, yes.
So if we incur all of the costs relative to remediation prior to the taking I'm not good at math in terms of how many days from, if you add 90 days on today, is that the end of June? Okay, end of June. If all the costs are incurred by that point and we get that special assessment added, to your point, that's a debt specifically owed via the tax bill and ownership, provided the sale price of the property, if we did move forward with divestment, is greater than the cumulative number of the back taxes and special assessments owed currently, as well as those that would be added as a result of the remediation. We would have to write a check to the landowner, but in the event it's the exact same number, it's a wash.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about that correctly in that we do consider special assessments when we're deciding whether a surplus exists. So with that court order coupled with the sale price, that's when we would have to do that analysis.
So I would request that, along the lines of Chair Gibbs' comments, is that you evaluate the need for us to issue a special assessment against the owner prior to the taking of the tax deed to protect our interest. And if indeed we need that special assessment notice to go out, that we delay the taking of the title until that occurs so we can keep our options open relative to the recovery of those costs.
I think that direction is clear.
All right, any other questions? If not, thank you. I know Jenny has left relative to Act 235 implementation. Get an appointment. That deals with the Judicial Protection of Judicial Privacy Act. We can talk about that in the future. I had put it on the agenda from an educational perspective because the Wisconsin Counties Association, through a Tillis law firm, did a informational presentation last week, and there are some ambiguities in current law and some issues, and we just have to make sure that we are, when the act goes live on April 1st, in a position to protect or handle any requests for privacy associated with the judicial eligible parties relative to our registered deeds and other offices.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that, just again, to build on, the reason why it's on your agenda is, as specifically stated, are there going to be policy actions that need to be taken by this body and ultimately the board or not? There are certainly things that staff are going to have to do operationally should we receive requests to shield information from judicial officials, which I think everyone, staff here and across the state, we fully expect to receive those requests, as the Director of State Courts is going to coordinate them. So we will make operational changes to be in compliance. There are some ambiguities in terms of really how does that happen in the Register of Deeds based on the current statute is treated a little bit differently. Their information is treated a little bit differently than general information that may relate to potentially protected information relative to a judicial official in other departments. But we're working through those things, and we're going to meet again. There's a lot of discussions that are happening, but right now I don't know of any policy actions that this body, the HR Finance and Property Committee or the full board are going to need to take, but we wanted to foreshadow that those things may come up. There is, as I believe we found out today or at the end of the day yesterday, it sounds like there's a cleanup bill. I think that was Kim that circulated that there's a cleanup bill that's been circulated amongst some legislators because of those areas of ambiguity. But right now, if you look at the parts of the act, apart from the Register of Deeds, it's really in my characterization, an exception to our obligation to disclose records under the public records law. So that's kind of the lens through which we're viewing these things. So again, I don't know of anything that the county board is going to need to take action on. But if you do hear about Act 235, that's what that relates to.
So we will, if needed, bring that back at a future meeting. Discussion by the committee on the 2025 through 27 biennial budget. I will kick that to the next meeting in light of time. There is a link to the Wisconsin Counties Association synopsis of that, but rest assured that the Joint Committee on Finance will be stripping out all the policy discussions that are contained in there per their past practice and then build off the base. I think that generally the budget was a very good budget for counties relative to increases in funding for conservation zoning planning staff, for courts, dealing with some of the crisis in North Central healthcare funding areas, and transportation aid were the priorities of the Wisconsin County Association and their county ambassador program meeting date last month. But we'll bring that up at a future meeting. I know some of the other committees are looking at potentially taking positions in support of some of the provisions, public safety relative to the court funding and others, but we'll bring that up later. That will bring us to Molly. Thank you for your patience for the on-site clinic update.
Yeah. Sorry, I know I'm supposed to touch that. You don't have to be close to these, they're very hot. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
all right, and I'll be relatively brief here, but so as the on-site clinic on November 6th, 2024, Estia started seeing our employees and dependents in 3 of their near-site clinics in Weston, Abbotsford, and Marshfield, performing primary care, urgent care, labs, imaging services, minor procedures, and dispensing some select prescription drug medications. They also took over all of our pre-employment physicals and drug screens. And on February 24th, they actually opened our on-site clinic, which is at the Lakeview campus. And so that was really exciting for staff. We've seen really positive trends in employee utilization and satisfaction, as you can see, up on the screen in the packet with some of the data that was provided. I did look back to November, December, and January data over the past 2 years with our previous clinic provider, and they were averaging about 76 appointments a month. Looking at with our new provider, Estia, over these same past 3 months, they're averaging 100 visits per month. So we have seen an increase in utilization. We've received positive feedback from employees on the expanded services and the treatment they're receiving. Are there any specific questions relative to our clinic operations and the relationship we currently have with Estia?
I think we're appreciative of the efforts to bring in a new provider, and it looks like we're having a significant increase, 50% increase in utilization approximately, just under 50%.
I can tell you my family's used it, and the feedback that I've gotten, quite honestly, from most staff is they're surprised that, oh, what do you mean? I'm not going to get charged for an x-ray? It's like, no, that's covered. It's It's at no cost to you directly. It's covered. There is a charge for those things, but it's covered through that plan and design with our insurer, which that conversation, I don't know if you want to elaborate, that is ongoing. We still need to get a final contract in place with Estia, but that conversation with GHT, I think, has gone well. They've expanded beyond kind of what we initially thought with respect to what would be covered at the clinic.
That's right. GHT is covering about 55% of our per member per month costs for clinic services. In addition to that, they are actually covering the lab services, the imaging fees, and some of those prescription medications. So the cost to us as a county it was reduced over what we initially thought engaging in this relationship. And it's encouraging to be able to partner with GHT on that.
So our hope is to bring you, kind of as you alluded to with financial data, bring regular updates relative to employee engagement and what we're seeing in terms of utilization. It's kind of part
And
of that.
savings?
Yeah, correct. And it's kind of part of that.
Well,
Go ahead, Mo.
Oh, I just think it's important to note, so we are still fully insured through GHT, so we are paying those premiums. In addition to those premiums, we are paying for 45% of the cost of this clinic. And so the cost savings, what we anticipate will be in our renewals when we renew with GHT, or another insurer, or in a consideration to potentially go self-funded at some point in the future. So those cost savings are not realized at this time and will likely not be realized.
Perfect. That's where I was going to go. So well teed up. This is getting you this data and then kind of seeing what our utilization at the clinic is and how we drive utilization. I think is kind of that maybe first and second steps toward that long-term health cost containment strategy. That, as Molly just said, as you go down the line, it's like you will build that kind of timeline. And I know that was one of the things that you asked for in my work plan was, what does that timeline, that long-term strategy look like? And this is that first part. The independent clinic is the first part to that, because you want to engage staff in the lowest cost to the employer possible. Those long-term strategies, and ultimately, again, the discussion about moving to, evaluating self-funded, I think is an important part. Kind of that in between is making plan design changes, whether you're insured or
Self-insured.
self-funded, to design your plan in a way that you, again, drive utilization in a manner that is to the lowest cost to the employer. And in our instance, that means lowest cost overall to taxpayers.
All right. Any questions for Molly? We look forward to your continued reporting to us and sharing that information. All right. If nothing else, we are down to next meeting date, which is March 25th at 3. I think, again, we have a pretty full agenda. We have a number of things that didn't get on today's agenda. We'll start we sort of started the quarterly reports with Sam, giving the updates on where she was. Connie will be coming in at the next meeting and giving an update on the treasurer's office, and we'll be starting that quarterly report and educational program from the various departments going forward. So anything else? If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order. All right. Vice Chair Marshall moved. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Lemmer. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are adjourned. I think your funding for the ice arena is going to be tough.
It's not mine. Contrary to any.
Well, the funding for the ice arena, it's going to be tough.
I have the box.